All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's limited level ups. Our topic for today is leveling up your mental game. And I'm going to say right off the bat that if you're looking to be the strongest Magic player you possibly can, I think having a strong mental game is just as important as everything else we talk about on the show. Strong draft fundamentals, knowing how to learn a current format. Not talked about quite as often, of course, but just as important, I think. Pretty big topic. We're going to divide things into 3 sections today. So part 1 is going to focus on tilt, how to manage tilt, how to tilt less, how to refocus when things go wrong for you. Part 2 is going to be on execution. That's as in in-game things, not of your opponents. If that wasn't clear, maybe I should just change the section's name. We'll call this section practical application. How about that? So this is stuff like avoiding autopilot and managing your pace of play, dealing with complex decisions. And then for part 3, we're going to zoom out a little bit and look at your relationship with Magic. So this section is going to be a little bit more about reflection. Why do you play Magic? Are you getting what you want out of playing the game? Sounds like maybe a bit of a different topic, right? Not as related to mental game as part 1 and 2. But I think if you're not getting what you want out of playing Magic, like if it's not satisfying, if your ideals aren't exactly aligned with how you get to engage with the game, in my experience, that can really boil over into your gameplay and have you playing worse, have you tilting more often, and just generally not being the best Magic player you possibly can be. Anyways, lots to cover, let's jump in. Okay, let's kick things off talking about tilting. And to me, tilting is basically when something unexpected or bad, usually both of them, happens in a game, and that makes you lose focus, or it throws you off so bad that it has you making decisions based on your emotional response rather than, what logic would dictate is the best thing to do. And there's often like a rumination component to it too, right? Like you play the wrong land on turn 2, you can't cast the 2-drop in your hand, and now for the next few turns, all you can think about is like, oh man, that was such a stupid mistake, and part of your processing power is taken up by those thoughts. So yeah, long and short of it, it's an emotional interference with good decision making. And it's a very human response, right? Like our brain evolved in such a way where when something goes wrong, your brain immediately recognizes it. It was like, oh, that didn't feel good. And it almost like automatically flips this switch where it goes, okay, I should start thinking about how to not have that happen again, right? And so immediately this brain power that you would love to use for logical decisions, what land to play, when to cast your instance, all those things that are good to think about in a game of Magic, some of that brain power gets diverted to thinking about that bad or unexpected thing that happened. And so I think that managing tilt is all about taking back control from that like primal part of your brain, right? Like actually saying to that part of your brain, hey, I know this situation feels pretty bad right now, but we've done the work prior, right? And that's what this is all about, like doing the work prior to being in this situation, saying like, I know this situation, there's a logical way to think about the situation. Let's try to stay in that mode of thinking right now. And because of this, because there is a process, like this is a skill. It's not like player A never tilts and player B always tilts. It's more player A has been through it all, right? They've gone through this process. They know what sets them off. They know their tilt triggers. They know how to identify, like, oh, this is a spot where my primal part of my brain kind of wants to take over here. Let's reel it back. Let's rein it back in. Where player B, the player who does, keyboard smash and tilts off, they might not have done that work beforehand. Very basic example, player A, that player who doesn't tilt much, they draw 12 lands one game. Player A knows that that's within the realm of reason, right? That's part of the range. Sometimes you're going to draw 12 lands. Where player B might be a little bit more like, hey, this is so unfair. Why is this happening to me? I got so flooded. I'm playing 16 lands and I still got flooded, right? The difference is not an innate ability, although different people are going to be tempered slightly differently. I do think everybody starts from a different baseline when they're going on this journey. But yeah, it's not all about temperament. It is more about being able to say, like, I know the logical way to think about whatever situation I'm in. I'm known for being fairly tilt-proof. Like, very little actually tilts me to the degree of, like, oh, it really affects my game. But that's not something that's just innate to me. I mean, yes, I think I am a pretty even keel kind of guy, but when I started playing Magic, digital Magic especially, like, I tilted all the time. Every brand of tilt you can imagine too, that, oh, I got flooded, I'm so unlucky. It's the revenge draft of going 0-3 and then wanting to draft again, even though it's not the right thing to do, right? Like, all of those things, I've experienced them. Any strong Magic player that's been playing for a while will have gone through every bad thing you can imagine, right? And that's why, a side note here, that's why when you talk to a seasoned Magic player and tell them your bad beat story, they're not that interested, because it's like, all right, that happens to everybody once in a while. Like, Sure, there's some exceptions, like exceptionally bad beats where you get incredibly unlucky, like just to the point where it's like, wow, that's actually impressive. Those are cool stories. But like the average bad beat story is just something that has happened probably numerous times for somebody who's been playing a bunch of years. So yeah, if you're looking to tilt less, I think the number one place you want to start is identifying what actually triggers you to tilt. And for the rest of this section, I've got a list of common tilt triggers. We're going to go through these, see if they resonate with you, do a little bit of self-reflection. And with all of those triggers, I'm going to present kind of a logical way to think about this situation and the things that might trigger you. And I want to say that it seems maybe a little bit tone deaf for me, somebody who's been playing such a long time, being like, oh yeah, like solve this emotional issue by logicking it out, right? It doesn't always work like that. And it's not going to work like that when you start this process, right? It's about slowly rewiring your brain. But it's not like, oh, just think about this logically, don't feel emotional. That's not it. I think the process here is actually an appeal to your emotional side. It's a way to make it understand and soothe it. Telling it a logical story, so that when it encounters the emotional situation, that part of your brain that's going off and going like, this is so unfair, where, a little crybaby in the back of your head that's like, please look at me, like, what's going on here? You can soothe that part of your brain and saying, hey, trusted adult here, gonna give the crybaby a little bit of advice. Here's the way we kind of want to think about this situation. When it comes down to it, that emotional response you're feeling is your brain going, I'm being treated unfairly. Something is not right here. It's producing this danger response and it wants to be soothed. And the easy way to be soothed is just lashing out emotionally and, smashing your keyboard or whatever you might do. And if you know that right way to soothe your brain, with a logical story that it'll slowly start to accept, right? Again, this isn't going to happen overnight, but it'll slowly start to accept that. That's where the growth as a player comes from. All right, let's move on to our list of tilt triggers now and how to reframe them into something a bit more positive. So we'll start with what I think is safe to say the most universal source of tilt, and that's just variance. Magic's full of it. I've got a really good hack, by the way, if you never want to get screwed or flooded ever again, play another card game, play something other than Magic, because variance is absolutely baked into the game's DNA at every level, right? Like from the cards you open in the draft to the skill level of the other players at your table. Maybe you have a really soft table, you get a busted deck, or maybe you face that person with the busted deck. Every single time you draw a card, that's variance. And so I think the first step to reinforce the more logical side of your brain here is just to internalize and accept the fact that, even though you have the best card in the set in your deck, you're not guaranteed a trophy. And on the flip side of that, you can still win games that you've mulliganed to 5 in. All right, variance kind of cuts both ways. There's good variance and bad variance. And, I think as long as you're not completely new to card games or Magic, this is something that you've heard to some degree, or heard on some level. We all know that variance is a big part of Magic. But I think emotionally, it's just really hard to accept. I think there's this thought that if you play well, you build well, you draft well, you deserve to win to some degree, right? Or not necessarily you deserve to win, but you're putting in an input of, I'm doing all these things right, and the output doesn't match up, right? That's why I think it tilts a lot of people, because it kind of violates this sense of what should happen, right? It feels like the game is disrespecting your efforts in some way. You're like, you did everything right, but still, you lost the game. Another way to think about this is I think you just have to know what you're signing up for when you're playing Magic. Like, you have to expect that bad things will happen eventually to you. Unjust bad things, right? After you've done all the right things, you're playing the right number of lands, your mana base is great, you're still gonna get mana screwed sometimes. And I know, at least for me, this was a big level up moment where eventually at some point I just said, don't let mana screw or mana flat or whatever kind of variance you're experiencing, don't let that surprise you, right? Because we were talking before about how tilt often comes from a surprise moment, right? Don't let these moments surprise you. Like when I've drawn my 10th land in a row on stream, it doesn't surprise me anymore. I know it's a possibility. I know it's within that range. And so that is no longer something that will throw me off balance as a player. Another thing to think about is that volume of play matters a lot. Like the reason that I'm no longer bothered, I'm no longer surprised when I don't hit my 3rd land drop on time or whatever it is. I keep a 2-land hand and don't get there. I'm sure those things have happened to me thousands of times in my Magic career. And I'm not trying to say, oh, just play a million games and these things won't affect you anymore. It's more just trying to say it gets better, right? As you do this more, it gets better, it gets easier. If you're thinking about this the right way, right? If you're always just kind of stuck in that like, oh, I'm so grumpy, like I got so unlucky. Like if you're reinforcing those thought patterns, that's what's going to stick, right? And I think it's what I really want to impose upon people that kind of are stuck in that mindset. Repeating those thought patterns just does not help very much, right? It self-soothes in the moment, but it doesn't actually progress you as a player. If you're trying to rewire your brain, you have to force yourself to be positive, or at very least neutral about these things, right? I'm not trying to say you have to be sunshine and roses every time you draw your 15th land, but just say, okay, this is okay. This is just gonna happen in some of our games. We're still safe, this is a game of Magic. It's not the end of the world. It's okay. And I think that leads to a practical thing that you can do. When you do catch yourself thinking these negative things, like you're narrating the game from the perspective of, look how lucky my opponent was, or look how unlucky I was. You're saying, I never draw what I need. That's your cue to be like, okay, you know what? Let's not lean into that. Let's stop for a second. Let's recognize what's happening here. Let's recognize that my brain is just trying to protect itself in this moment, right? Even though protection at the cost of mental bandwidth of actually doing well in this game of Magic isn't a good trade-off if, again, your ultimate end goal is to be a better Magic player. So if you catch yourself with those negative thoughts, I think you're going to try to replace them with either a neutral thought or a positive thought, but then the actual end goal is to not even have that moment, whatever that moment is. You draw an extra land that you don't need. Don't even let that moment register on your emotional scale. Of course, you need to take it in as a piece of information that is important to the game, right? That's still important to think about. But those strong emotions take up bandwidth, they take up brain space, and that's brain space you could be using to make the right play or try to see what the game looks like in 3 turns. Now, something really important to talk about when we talk about variance, and this is something that I have said before, but you really don't want to use variance and the fact that it exists as a crutch. To say, oh, I got unlucky here, variance is such a big part of this game, I got so unlucky, this was one of those games I got unlucky. You kind of want to sit in this Goldilocks zone of understanding and internalizing that variance is a large part of this game, but also understanding that in almost every game you play, I can guarantee everybody listening right now, in almost every game you play, there is something you could have done better. I say this because I think that about my games. I say this because Reed Duke, one of the best Magic players in the world, you know what he often does when he's playing on the Pro Tour? He goes back and looks at his games if they were on coverage to see if there were any mistakes that he made, right? That's the kind of mindset. I'm not suggesting everybody go back and look at every single one of their games, but that's kind of the mindset you want to channel, right? Always examine yourself first and what you could have done. And then if you truly, you're looking back at your 17 lands logs, your untapped logs, or whatever it is, you're playing with a friend, as long as you can say, hey, I've done my due diligence and I really can't see anything that I could have done better, okay, then you can say, hey, yeah, if I didn't draw that 7th land and drew a spell instead, maybe I would have won this game. So yeah, just to put a bit of a stamp on this section, a variance, it's not something you can control necessarily, but you can plan for it in a lot of ways, both mentally, the things we just talked about, but, in game too, like the actual actions you take in the game, in your drafting, in your deck building. A lot of the drafting and deck building fundamentals that myself and other content creators harp on all the time, a lot of those are actually designed to reduce variance. There are guidelines you can follow to be more consistent. So we're talking things like playing 17 lands, right? One of the main reasons we play 17 lands is so you can hit your 4th land on turn 4. And that is something that the vast majority of limited decks want to do. I often say you want to play like 6 or 7 2-mana spells, and that's so you can more consistently have one of those on turn 2 in your opening hand every game. So yeah, variance is going to happen. It's your job to comfort your brain and tell it that when it does happen, it's not the end of the world. You're not in any danger. It's okay. You should expect this to happen. Tell your brain, hey, next time when this happens, don't be so surprised, man. And also, just make sure you're doing everything you possibly can from a gameplay perspective to reduce variance, because that also leads to less tilt. All right, next up on our list of tilt triggers, another really common one, you misplay, right? You misplay and it throws you off, and maybe it was a game you even could have won if you just refocused, but that misplay just, really threw you off balance. And I think it's kind of interesting. I've noticed that some people only get tilted by the things that are out of their control, right? All the variant stuff we were just talking about, the lack of agency, I think, really tilts some people. And there's some people on the exact opposite end of things where they only get tilted by things that are in their control, right? So it's kind of just interesting to think where you kind of lie on that spectrum. So if you look at the psychological side of things here, like what's going on in your brain when you misplay, I think there's 2 main components. One is that rumination that I was talking about before. You play the wrong land on turn 2, you can't cast your 2-drop, maybe you're playing in paper, you miss a trigger, and your brain's just kind of stuck on that, right? It's trying to problem solve but at a time that's not very helpful to do so, right? The misplay has happened, you can't go back, and so it's not helpful to really just keep thinking about it. And I think the solve for this, or the way you want to think about this, is once you've made a mistake or a misplay, you want to kind of just like zap that out of your brain. Like zap the fact that you made a mistake out of your brain so you don't think about it. Or you could say to yourself actively, like, I made a mistake, and that's okay. Just as long as you're making peace with it somehow, and you can refocus to what's actually important, right? So when I misplay, the way I conceptualize it is, okay, that bad thing has happened. Now what does the game look like? I still am playing a game. I'm still trying to solve a problem. It just looks a little bit different than the ideal world that I possibly could be in. And you don't want to ruminate on that ideal world, right? You want to just say, okay, this is the game now. What do I do? It also might be helpful to say to yourself, okay, if I make a mistake today, I'm not going to think about it in the game, but I will dedicate some time afterwards to figuring out, okay, what did I do wrong? How can I prevent that from happening next time, right? So if you are somebody whose brain just really wants to solve that problem in the moment in the game, you can say, okay, brain, we're going to think about this later. We're going to solve this problem, and we're going to be back all the better for it, right? It's great to learn from your mistakes. Mistakes are great, by the way. Like, it is good to make mistakes if you're good at learning from them. If you're not good at learning from your mistakes, then, okay, yeah, that's another problem. But the pain of a mistake is a really great teaching tool, right? That's another way you can look at this. The other component of misplay tilt is the real emotional side. Whether that be negative self-talk of being like, ah, man, of course, yeah, I'm so stupid. Like, how can I make that misplay? Or, you know, I always misplay like this. Oh, man, I'm such a bad Magic player. There's that side of things, but there's also like the embarrassment side of things, right? Like, you make a very obvious mistake. You attack into your opponent's creature. That creature had first strike. You forgot about it, and your creature gets eaten. Now you're not even thinking about it from like a gameplay perspective. You're thinking about it from like a self-worth perspective of like, oh my god, that's so stupid. How could I have done that? The thing is though, everybody misplays, right? And no one is going to think you're an idiot if you misplay. And if they do think you're an idiot, then that's a them problem, right? That's something that they need to deal with. On the flip side of things, if you misplay and you refocus and end up winning that game, that's really impressive, right? And you're going to feel very good about that. And this is something that I picked up absolutely from streaming. You know, anybody who streams, you've got hundreds of people watching your game, scrutinizing your plays, they'll point out every misplay you make. But when I started streaming, like that kind of thing, if I made a mistake, that really got to me. Like the embarrassment of having a bunch of people watching you make a silly mistake. Like I really felt that in my soul. I felt that, again, personally, I felt like, oh man, like people are, we're going to think I'm a terrible player, you know, whatever it is, all this negative self-talk. And the coping strategy that I developed over time is exactly what I just said, where, you know, you can reframe things where it's like, okay, you made a mistake. You're not a terrible Magic player. You're not a stupid person. You can learn from this mistake. This is actually good. And at this point in my streaming career, I'm happy when people point out my mistakes. I'm like, oh, wow, like I didn't see that. Thank you so much. I'm not going to do that next time. You know, it might be a line of card text that I forgot about on a new card or something like that. I'm so thankful that happens. And if you can just kind of, you know, implement that in your own little bubble, in your own little head, right? Because when it comes down to it, there's like the player actually playing the game, and then there's your brain who's kind of observing. And I think there's kind of an analog where you, the active person playing, is the streamer, and your brain is chat, right? Just like being like, oh, mistake, mistake, mistake. And so if you can say to your brain, hey, thanks for pointing that out. I'll remember it next time. Not only will you tilt less, but you'll just get better as a player. All right, next up on our tilt trigger list is the opponent got lucky. And this is very much in the same space as dealing with variance. This is a type of variance, but I think it's distinct enough to talk about it in its own section. So, you know, one of the more common things that I see from players when they get tilted, when their opponent gets lucky, like the situation is the opponent plays 3 basics on turn 3. They have all 3 of their colors. Maybe they even play a 4th or have 5 different colored lands on turn 5. And you just think, wow, my opponent doesn't deserve to win this game, right? I know the mana base rules. I know that you're not supposed to splash like that. And I am more deserving of winning this game than the opponent. A few things going on here. Number 1, you don't know what your opponent's deck looks like. A bunch of basics doesn't necessarily constitute a terrible mana base. I mean, sure, if it's like literally like 3, 3, 3, 3, if you're getting to turn 25, you've seen their full deck, you can see their mana base is really sketchy. Okay, that's one thing. But I've had a lot of mana bases where I've got a lot of multicolor fixing in my deck, but it just so happens that the fixing I drew in my opening hand was my basic lands. So yeah, you're only seeing a small portion of the opponent's deck. I wouldn't pass judgment on it, that they're a terrible mana base builder just from, you know, seeing 10 cards or whatever. The other thing is, it just shouldn't matter, right? And I know the whole theme of today is this shouldn't matter, but it does. but I feel like this one in particular, like it really shouldn't matter because you have no control over how your opponent chooses to build their deck. You also have no control over the order in which they draw their cards, right? And so I kind of think of, how lucky my opponent gets as just a factor of difficulty in a given game, right? Sometimes my opponent's stack is going to be stacked perfectly, and it's going to be a little bit of a harder game. Sometimes they're not going to have very good draws at all, and it's like, all right, I got an easy game here. Sometimes the opponent is going to top deck that removal spell at exactly the right moment, and you kind of just have to say, you know what? That's how the game works, right? Like sometimes the outcomes just favor the opponent. And notably, that top deck the removal spell at the exact right moment, usually that means they swing for lethal, right? You leave exactly one blocker back, they top deck removal spell. And, you kind of think that might not matter because it's the last part of the game, but tilts can absolutely carry over into your next games, right? And so just a small interjection tip here. Anytime you do find yourself tilted, take a little bit of a break, right? Just take a breather before you jump into your next game. It's so easy to do that online. Just click, let's get this over with. Let's actually have a good game and I can overwrite those feelings that I'm having right now. You'll do yourself a lot better if you just take a second, right? Just don't go into your next game tilted. This also comes up when the opponent's playing a bad card, right? It's the same kind of mentality of like, oh, that card's really bad. I know that card's really bad, but they're still beating me with it. They don't deserve to win. Like, I've got all the good cards in my deck. It's the same thing. It just should not matter. The sooner you can internalize that this just shouldn't matter to you, the easier it gets. There's a really, really great Pro Tour game that I'm going to link in the description. It's one of my favorite games of all time. It's Pro Tour 2015, Yuki Ichikawa versus Jackson Cunningham. There's this absolutely insane moment in the game where it's going pretty well for Jackson. Jackson's playing like a green-white creature aggro deck. Yuki is playing like a Jund mid-rangey deck. And Jackson's got like some pretty big creatures. Yuki Ichikawa has a scavenging goes on the battlefield, and combat's looking to go pretty well for Jackson. And Yuki draws for turn, passes the turn back, and the card that he drew was a Golgari Charm. And one of the modes of Golgari Charm is all creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn. And it's a very complex situation for me to just talk out exactly what happens here. Watch the video and you'll see what happens. But basically, Yuki was empty-handed. Things are going well for Jackson, and with one lucky top deck, he turns the entire game around because he basically 3-for-1s Jackson. And what I want to point out about this situation is Jackson's response to it. This is a terrible thing to happen, right? Like you're cruising and one top deck puts you in a bad spot. Jackson's immediate response to the Golgari Charm, you can see he immediately goes into thinking mode. He sees that it's pretty bad for him, but you can see he's looking in the graveyard, he's looking at his hands, he's looking at the cards on the board, he's saying, okay, here I am in this situation. What can I do now? And it's a perfect example of everything I've been talking about today. So yeah, go watch that game, or at very least the clip of the game where this play happens. It's really cool. I promise you won't regret it as long as you kind of know what the cards do. But yeah, just wanted to shout that out as a prime example of not getting upset when your opponent's lucky and really just focusing on what matters. And then the last tilt trigger we're going to talk about today, we're actually going to talk about it a little bit later, but I just wanted to bring it up here, is when you're feeling like you're wasting resources, right? Wasting time, wasting gems, wasting money, whatever it is. I think it's a huge source of tilt for a lot of people. And I think this is the one that's the most, like, I don't know if I want to call it justified exactly, but the one that I think demands a little bit of a deeper analysis, right? And that's what we're going to do when we get to part 3, because this isn't one that I can just say, oh, just think about it this way. This is one where you have to do a little bit of self-examination and think about your relationship with the game and what you actually want to invest. And if you're enjoying the show, check out the Patreon, patreon.com/limitedlevelups. That is the #1 place that you can go if you like what we're doing here, if you want to support the content, a bunch of rewards over there that we want to give back to you if you choose to give to us. And if you want to support the show in a non-monetary way, a comment, a like, a subscribe on the YouTube video goes a really, really long way. Also want to shout out the Discord. That's also available in the links in the description. Lots of good stuff going on in the Discord these days, even though, Spider-Man is not the most thrilling thing to talk about. There's a lot of folks over there setting up cube drafts and talking about the flashback formats that are happening. So yeah, great place to be. It's a free Discord. Go check that out. Let's get back to the show. All right, moving on to section 2, execution. How do you swiftly execute your opponent? Now, I'm changing this to in the arena. I've decided that as we've got on here. I think in the arena is the best name for this section. Basically, this section is aspects of mental game that aren't exactly about tilt, but other things you might encounter and things you want to think about when you're actually playing the game. So for me, kind of the first order of business, if you're trying to get to a state of mental clarity, is showing up as the best version of yourself when you're playing Magic, right? So taking care of your physical needs, of your mental needs. This is kind of like the bare minimum or just the prerequisites for, showing up to the table as the best version of yourself, especially, if you're playing a competitive event of some kind. Maybe an RCQ at your game store, maybe it's an Arena Direct or something, just something you really, really care about and you really want to make sure you're setting yourself up for success. So this means being well rested. This means being fed. If you're going to a paper event, make sure you take some time to shower beforehand. You'll thank yourself. You'll feel like your best self. The people around you will also thank you. I know for me, I feel a huge difference in myself, just my mental clarity and just my confidence, honestly, when, let's just say, there's an arena open one weekend, right? Huge difference if I get up an hour before, I jump in the first draft, I have a shower, even if I'm not going anywhere, it just feels good to have a shower, just be all cleaned up, get some food in me. I feel pretty good about that. I've also played a lot of arena opens where I sleep in a little bit and I wake up 10 minutes before last call for joining the draft happens. And, I'm just rolling out of bed. I'm still kind of groggy. I'm making my draft picks. I can just feel I'm not playing to the best of my ability. I'm sort of framing this as something you really want to think of when you're playing a competitive event, and maybe, not as much during a given arena draft. But I also think there's an important component there where you do want to make sure that you're in a good mindset to play. If you're trying to play your best, which I imagine if you're listening, you're trying to do that, there's this interesting tension where a lot of the time, Magic, we play Magic because it's fun and, it's a distraction and it blows off some steam, maybe after you've had a tough day. And it can be tricky because if you're in that kind of not so great state of mind, you're like, I just want to, distract myself. You have to ask, will I feel even worse if I do poorly in this draft? And you're more likely to do poorly in the draft because you're not playing as your best self. So it's just something I think every individual kind of has to wrestle with, right? Like, you can either say, okay, I'm only going to join drafts when I know I'm in a good headspace. It's not late at night. It's not like midnight where I'm going to be tired. I'm not going to be playing my best. Or you might say, you know what? I know some drafts I'm not going to be playing my best. That's okay. I play this game to have fun. That's a big part of why we play the game, right? Just enjoy ourselves. And even if I bomb this draft, I 0-3, I 1-3, that's okay. I'm not going to end up feeling worse than I did before I jumped into the draft. Next up is training yourself to have some mental fortitude in losing games, which kind of translates to don't scoop early. I think looking back at my first few years of playing Limited Magic, this was my biggest mental block, like the biggest hurdle I had to get over. Because, the moment something bad happened in a game, the moment things started to not go my way, I just remember mentally checking out of that game, right? Just feeling so deflated. And, this can come from a bunch of different things. It can be like, you started the game on a multi-5, right? And you already kind of feel deflated. When ideally, you're just like, all right, I've multi-5, here we are. How do I solve this puzzle, right? How do I play this game? Or you miss your third land drop. And it's like, well, I really would have liked to hit that third land drop. It can sometimes feel like you lose the game on the spot right there, right? But, the more I play, the more I just stuck in games that felt bad to play, the more you realize that so many of those games are winnable games, especially in these early game situations where you haven't really seen what your opponent's up to and what kind of cards they have. I think it's very natural to kind of imagine the opponent's hand as this perfect hand that's going to curve out on you. And even if you do hit that land next turn, it's a little bit too late. But so many times my opponents have scooped when they missed their third land drop. And I look at my hand, I'm like, wow. I was not feeling good about this game. Like, even if they missed a land a turn or two, my hand was not great. I kept maybe a slightly sketchy hand, and my first few draw steps weren't great, but I played a 2-drop, and that was enough pressure for the opponent to be like, I missed my third land, might as well scoop this game. And now, I'm not saying that there's never situations you should scoop. There's definitely a lot of spots where I go, maybe I have a 1% chance to win this game, but, life equity, that matters too. You want to conserve your time. Time is truly a resource in life. Also, of course, if you're playing a competitive best-of-3 match, sometimes scooping is just in your best interest for time, right? You're like 35 minutes into the first match, and it's going really long. You're pretty sure the opponent's going to win. Okay, it's probably best to scoop it up so you can play all 3 of your games. But Magic is, at its core, a game of percentages and edges, and if you're scooping early in games that you have a chance to win, you're giving up a lot of percentage points, and you're not getting those edges. And, something that really changed my mindset, something that actually really helped me level up and get over that hurdle I was talking about, is an old episode of Limited Resources where William Huey Jensen's on. And he's talking about, this situation I'm talking about, but about scooping and mental fortitude. And he says, the only reason a player would scoop a game that they have a chance to win is because it's hard for them to sit with discomfort, and their brain is saying, let's get out of this bad situation. If your goal is to win at all costs, then yeah, there's no other reason you would scoop other than, hey, brain feel bad, let's get out of here. And it's really, really valuable to play losing games so that you build an intuition of what it looks like to win a losing game, right? If you always scoop a game that starts to head in a not so great direction, you're never going to play games where you come back from behind and you actually win. And that's a skill in itself, right? So you never actually give your chance to develop that skill if you don't stick in those tough games. Also, a very small edge when you're playing a best of 3 match, a reason not to scoop game 1 is it actually might give your opponent more information in game 2 and game 3 of your tendencies as a player, right? So if in game 1, let's assume here the opponent isn't scooping because of time, right? They're scooping because they're about to lose. If you don't make your opponent kill you and you just scoop, you're like, yeah, you probably have this one. That says to a strong player, okay, this player is somebody who is likely to scoop if they're losing, right? And why that matters is because if you get into a tough situation where it's a really close race and you have lethal on board, but the opponent's got some open mana and a card or two in hand, you're like, okay, well, I could swing out everything here and I would win. But if they have a spell that disrupts that, I'm in a pretty bad spot. Well, if I know that my opponent is somebody who is likely to scoop anyways, then I'm going to more likely put them on, they probably have something here, and don't go for that big attack, right? But if you're the type of player that makes your opponent kill you, you stick it out until literally your life points are at 0, you're not going to give your opponent that information about your tendencies. And I've absolutely used this to my advantage in arena opens. Next up is pace of play, which is basically just saying, not playing too quickly and not playing too slowly. I think that most players have a natural rhythm that feels comfortable to them, kind of a natural cadence in the game where, you generally think for X amount of time on every decision, and maybe you have certain points in each turn that you put on the slow thinking cap, or just kind of a rhythm that works for you. And ideally this rhythm is kind of at a speed where, you're not taking too long to make every decision. You want to be respectful of your opponent's time and make sure, especially this is a paper match, that everybody kind of plays fair. But you also do want to make sure that your plays are deliberate and intentional. I think for most people, in my experience coaching people, usually the issue is playing too quickly rather than playing too slowly, right? And when you're playing too quickly, it could be a few things. It could be just carelessness, right? Just everybody knows that moment when they go to cast a card and the second they click their mouse, they're like, no, I wish I didn't do that. And if you just took 1 more second or 2 more seconds, you would have realized, oh yeah, that wasn't the right thing to do. Playing too quickly can also just be nerves, right? Or anxiety, especially in a paper match. Just kind of you want to get the game over with, and you get a little bit tense, and that can lead to some play that's a little too quick. Also though, especially when you're playing in paper, there's this effect that I've noticed where I think it's kind of a human thing. We like to mirror each other. And usually the slower player in the matchup will pick up their pace to meet the faster player in the matchup, right? And, well, I mentioned, it's really good to be respectful of your opponent's time. As long as you're playing reasonably, you're not taking 4-minute turns or whatever, I think it's good to try to resist the urge to meet your opponent where they are in their pace of play. Because like I said, everybody has their own rhythm. And, you don't want to be tricked into jumping on somebody else's train that doesn't exactly work for you, right? And often this will happen when we have a very experienced player who's a very quick player versus somebody who's maybe a little bit less experienced. It can also kind of feel like sometimes as that less experienced player is like, oh, am I playing too slowly? Should I be playing quickly? No, just make sure that you're playing at a pace that feels comfortable to you. If you're somebody who thinks you play a little bit too quickly, I would just recommend just deliberately, it's really kind of painstaking to do this, but just deliberately talking out every single play you make and say, I'm doing this for this reason. Almost narrating it, right? Almost like a streamer would. Because, I tell you, when I stream and I say things out loud, I go, oh wait, that didn't actually make sense. Let's try that again. Let's go back to the drawing board. Playing too slowly, also an issue too. Sometimes that can be the issue. And usually a player that plays too slowly is worried that they're going to make the wrong choice, right? You really want to sit in the tank for a while and be like, okay, am I really making the right choice here? And, a few things about this. Well, one, the classic thing you hear, I've said this before on the show, but I know it's like a classic Magic thing where if you have the choice between play A and play B, and you're really antagonizing, like, oh, should I do play A or play B? If you're really not sure and it's really stressing you out, that means that both play A and play B are pretty darn close to each other, right? When you compare play A and play B and you're like, oh yeah, talk it out and like, oh, obviously play A is better. But when it's pretty darn close, you're not usually giving up that much of an edge, even if you choose the wrong option. The other thing is, if you play too slowly, or especially if you have turns where maybe you're playing at a reasonable pace, but then you really slow down on a turn two, that is another thing that gives a strong opponent information, right? Because something that I pick up subconsciously when I'm playing a game, again, going back to the opponent's tendencies, is I can kind of see the pace that they're playing, their rhythm. And when there's a disruption to that rhythm, when they're thinking for a very long time, I know that's something they're thinking about, right? There's a card in their hand that is making them think, whether it be maybe they drew a combat trick for a turn and they're trying to say, okay, do I have good attacks? Well, that pause, if they're pausing for a really long time before they go to combat, that tips me off to say, all right, well, they didn't think this long all those other times, and so there's something up here. Or, another example is you're holding up a counter spell, and your opponent puts a spell in the stack, and you're like, do I want to counter that? Like, you take forever. And it's like, well, if you choose not to counter that spell, your opponent for sure knows that you have a counter spell at hand now, right? So that's more information. So it benefits you not just from a mental game perspective to play at the pace that works well for you, but also to not leak that kind of information to the opponent. Ideally, you're just playing at the same rhythm every single turn, or at least as close to as possible. That way, you won't leak that kind of information, right? Your opponent won't be tipped off to, oh, something's up here. They're thinking for a while. Next up is focus and presence. And I can give you a real quick level up, something that'll give you a lot of percentage points if you're not already doing this. Don't play distracted. Don't play with a YouTube window up. Don't play with another game on another monitor. Maybe you're playing an auto battler or something that needs a little bit less attention. Every moment that you're not focused on the game, again, that's your brain using mental energy somewhere else. But also, you miss a lot of small little cues, right? Like, I'm thinking if you've got another tab open, you're doing something else, you're most likely playing on your opponent's turn, right? And it's so important to focus on what the opponent's doing and where they're thinking and the sequence that they cast their spells in. Like, you miss out on so much if you're not paying attention to those kind of things, right? So if you're somebody with that habit and you're looking to get better, that's an easy one to kick. But also kind of just want to talk about, in the moment, maintaining focus and presence. And, everybody's going to have their own little tricks that work for them. But just something to ground you, right? When you get into a situation where your brain starts buzzing, right? It's maybe not exactly to the level of tilt, but it's to the level of something's fuzzy in your brain. And this could be you're distracted, you're hungry, something, bad in the game happened. You want to find some way to recenter and say, all right, I'm in this game. I'm trying to figure out all these puzzles that are happening in a game of Magic, and I need to make sure I'm here, right? Make sure I'm fully present. So refocusing could look like deep breathing, just like, in and out, and just calm that brain. It could be, honestly, something that I do. I don't recommend this for everybody, like, because everybody's going to be a little bit different. But I pinch myself, actually, a little bit. I take, like, my thumb and my middle finger, and with my nails, I pinch the skin on my index finger. And that kind of just snaps me back into it, and just like, oh, this little shock here. Let's refocus, right? It's kind of some negative reinforcement in some ways, I guess, but it works for me, right? So yeah, just play around with things, find something that works for you, that grounds you. Another thing too is regaining focus not in the game, but after the game, right? So if especially if you're playing a big paper event or something, just really saying, all right, that last round didn't go so well, but next round, it's a new round. It's a new thing I have to focus on. I have to be present. I have to not be stuck in that last round, right? Very important to do that. But even just on Arena, right? Like, after you lose a game, it's good just to take a minute or two, right? Just to refocus, I think. The last thing I want to talk about for this section is information overload. When the game just gets too complex to track everything, you're not sure what you're even supposed to do. And I think this warrants its own episode. I'm probably going to have an episode in the future about complex board states and complex decision making and what to do when there's a bunch of things on board to track. So I won't go super in depth here, I think the one thing, if you really feel like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do in this game, usually those games are like board stally games where both players have a pretty wide board and nobody has a clearly good attack. I think the best question to ask yourself is, one of the more simple ones that we ask ourselves as limited players, and that's just, who's the beatdown? Or I guess more accurately, who has inevitability in this matchup, which, is kind of the same thing. But often on big stalled out boards, the way that those game states often resolve themselves, one player draws something that lets them attack with all their creatures. So maybe it's like a mass pump spell, right? And you're like, okay, well, if I have one of those in my deck, of course, I'm trying to draw. That's my plan. I'm trying to draw into that. Or the board just gets stalled out and then somebody draws their bomb, right? Their awesome game-winning card. Maybe it's a big flyer that can break through the board stall. Maybe it's a board wipe or something to clear up the mess. So I think when you're trying to figure out, like, what should I do? You want to think broadly, right? You want to think like, okay, am I the one who's supposed to try to engineer some sort of situation where I am able to attack all? Or maybe I attack all over the course of 2 turns. I attack all 1 turn, some trades happen, but I get some damage through, and at the end of the day, my board is better. Or do I have a really good reason to stall out this game, whether that be a game winner, a giant bomb, a way to make combat profitable for you. And the details are going to matter, of course, and I almost worry this is a bit too general, too broad of advice to really be useful. But I do think in a lot of game states where the board gets completely stalled out, it's very easy to lose sight of, where is this game going, right? That's the question you want to ask yourself. Where is this game going? What is still in my deck? Anyways, like I said, good topic for another time. I think there's a lot of meat on the bones for this topic, but we'll just leave it there for now. Last section for today, section 3, is the big picture and keeping a healthy relationship with the game. Because if you're not in a good place with that relationship, you're not going to be playing as your best self. You're probably going to tilt way more easily, and you're probably just not going to have a very good time playing Magic. Basically, if you're at the point where when you lose a game of Magic, it feels like that loss has greater consequences than just literally losing at a game. That's all you've done. You've lost at a game. That's a tip-off that there are probably some other underlying issues that are good to take a look at, right? In the tilt section earlier, I mentioned in this section we're going to talk about another brand of tilt, and that's the wasting resources tilt, where you feel like you've wasted your money, wasted your time, wasted your gems, whatever it is. And I guess what I would say to that, if you're really feeling the weight of that, I mean, look, everybody's like, oh man, I overthrew this draft, that's 10 or 15 bucks that I don't have anymore. Like, that's a normal feeling. But if the thought of like playing a draft and walking away with fewer gems in your account than you started with really starts to get to you, that's probably a sign that it's good to reevaluate how much you're actually comfortable spending on the game. Like, if you feel that every time you enter a draft, you're basically just gambling with your mental health, right? That's not a good thing to do. It's like, well, if I do really well, I'm going to feel a little spike of dopamine, and if I do not so well, I'm going to feel really, really bad, and you're probably going to want to jump back in the queue to recoup your losses, right? So it just starts to spiral. I'm sure this is a very common experience. I had Ryan Sachs on the podcast a few years ago. He actually had a great episode on Magic addiction. If you want to go check that out, if that's interesting to you, I'll link that in the description. He was really candid, really, really phenomenal episode. And if anybody feels like they are struggling to that degree, I would highly recommend going and listen to that. And there's a pretty easy fix to this, I guess, but maybe easier said than done, of just setting yourself a limit. Saying, okay, this month I'm happy spending $50, $100 on drafting, but I won't go past that. I think setting yourself a limit kind of just gives you some peace of mind, actually, because when you do lose, you know it's not like, well, I'm not going past my limit of something I'm comfortable with. A loss is just a loss here. And if you experience this and the loss you feel is not a monetary loss, but a loss of time, right? You jump into a draft, you 0-3 right away, you feel like, oh man, like I didn't get to play Magic, this was a complete waste. Well, if you're of the mindset of, I'm trying to do everything I can to possibly get better, then I would say the fix to that just is a bit of a mindset shift, right? Where, every time you engage with Magic, whether that be drafting, playing a losing game, there are still going to be things to learn. When I do a draft log review and the person went 0-3 in their draft and they go like, they send me the draft and the gameplay and they go, I don't know if I could have done anything differently. Almost always. Like, it's very, very rare that I send that back and go, you're right. There's something you could have done differently. There's always something you could do. So turn that loss, that 0-3, into a learning experience, right? Like, go back and look at the logs in 17 lands. Look for where you could have done something better. Send it to a friend. Ask them to do the same if they, are so kind to be able to do that. Basically, if you're equating I lost to I wasted my time, I think that's just not the right way to look at it. And look, it's not the easiest mindset shift to make, I understand, but I do think that is the end goal, being able to extract something useful out of your loss. Now, swinging back around to the monetary side of things for a second, there is a little bit of tension here, where I'm saying, okay, set yourself a monthly limit. Your mental health will thank you. But obviously, the more you play, the better you get and the quicker you'll get better. So you are incentivized to play more and, break some sort of limit. But there are ways to play and get better without spending money. So, one of them is join a Discord. My Discord has this. People organizing drafts over there, right? Most of the time they're like cube drafts, but sometimes people do new set drafts, especially at the beginning of a format. You can also probably just, send out a bit of a bat signal and be like, hey, I want to draft Edge of Eternity. Is anybody in? There'll be some people who want to join. So yeah, find community drafts that, you can just go on websites, draft there, import the cards to Arena. You can also, if you really want to, I do this in my coaching session sometimes. You can just do heads up games, right, against a friend. Just go into the direct challenge match. Both of you bring, the best draft deck you've drafted in the past week or whatever. And that can be pretty fun, like a pretty fun way. And also you have a friend who, if they're also interested in getting better, you can have some post-game analysis being like, oh, why'd you do that? Or, you can maybe even look at your draft logs together. Like, there's a lot you can do there. And not only will you save you money, but, opens you up to a good time hanging out with your friends, a bit of community. And of course, like I've been mentioning all throughout this episode, going back, looking at your draft logs, like that's a good way to engage with the game. Not as thrilling and dopamine filled, of course, but you'll get something out of it. You get to flex your engagement with Magic muscles and not break the bank. But even just like, watching content, watching a stream, reading an article, like I think all that kind of stuff sort of kind of scratches the itch of I'm engaging with Magic while not having to spend anything. And then the last thing I want to touch on for today is that I think it's so important to actively separate your self-worth from Magic, because it's so easy to take this thing that we spend a lot of time in, that we really enjoy, that in all honesty, a lot of reason that we play Magic is to feel smart, right? Feel like, oh, well, I did something really cool and really smart, and I outsmarted my opponent. And when you don't do that and you lose, it can be easy to feel stupid, and you're not stupid. Believe me, you're not stupid. You don't want your losses in a game that contains as much variance as Magic does to dictate how you feel just walking around as a person. And this is on small scale, on large scale too, right? On the large scale of things, this is definitely a component of competitive play. And, you top 8 a bunch of times, you never get to that first place in that RCQ, or, you play 5 RCQs and you don't make it to the top 8, and you can really carry that with you, right? And I think a way to reframe this is just thinking, well, if I knew I would eventually get there, right? I'd eventually make that top 8 draft. I'd eventually get to that slot 1 in the 1-slot RCQs. Would I be upset about losing today if I just knew it was a stepping stone to getting to that end path? Because I think really what we're worried about is I lost and I'm going to feel this way forever, or I'm going to be at this exact same skill level forever. And if you're doing the right work to get better in the right ways, I can guarantee that that's not going to be true, right? You will get better with the right practice. On a smaller scale, this comes up too, right? Like, especially with the ranking system and just the mythic system basically, and especially when you get to mythic, like the numbers, 100%, the whole like number go up, brain feel good, number go down, brain feel bad, like that is absolutely happens when you're playing digital Magic. Or I guess with mythic numbers, it's the opposite, right? It's so important just to not let that ranking system hack your brain, right? And because that's what it's trying to do, right? The game is trying to say, hey, you got to play more. Your numbers going down. You got to get those numbers back up, kid. When you jump into a draft, it should be because you're ready to engage with it in a healthy way, not because you're mythic 1700 and you want to get above the thousands or whatever it is, right? And I think that's going to be that. Thank you so much for watching and listening, everybody. So next 2 weeks, I will be on vacation, actually. I'm going to China for 2 weeks. Very excited about that. Should be fun. But that means not as much content. And I already didn't put out a lot of content this week. I got really sick. Apologies for this video actually coming out quite a bit later than usual, but came down with a really nasty cold. I'm sure you can maybe even hear it a bit. But yeah, next 2 weeks, not going to be too much content either. I do have one more episode coming out. I've already recorded this and put it all together. I think it's going to be really cool. I interviewed a bunch of content creators and pro players talking about their limited level up. So I've got a bunch of people sharing their thoughts. So yeah, that is still coming next week. If you made it this far, like, comment, subscribe on the YouTube video. Thanks so much for watching and listening. Patreon in the description if you want to support the show. We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.